All right, look, if you're in the business world, going to conferences is just part of the gig. Sometimes they can come off as being a little bit salesy or generic or superficial, but just like with anything in life, it really comes down to what you make of it. So let's talk about how to be really productive at a conference and still keep your sanity. The whole idea of a conference really started as a place for businesses to come together and showcase their products.
On the spill, turn it over without even putting any pressure. 50% of the cola right there. You follow me, camera guy?
And it's really kind of taken a lot of twists and turns and morphed into what it is today. So let's really think about what a conference is for a moment. It's a place where a number of people gather with some sort of commonality. It's usually industry specific, but there's something bringing all these people to the same place at the same time for some reason. So the advantage is that you can oftentimes meet with people face to face that you wouldn't normally have a chance to interact with. And also they generally have a very predictable schedule of events. So you can really plan in advance and really get a sense of what you're walking into. And the other thing it allows you to do, because it's so planned and scheduled, is that you can engage with people strategically. So if you plan it correctly, it can actually be incredibly valuable. And it can be a great place to learn about new tools and technologies that are cutting edge in any given field. And it also gives you a tremendous amount of kind of personal credibility and brand recognition. And you may be thinking, but wait a second, I'm an introvert. And in some ways, it can actually be an advantage to be an introvert. And let me explain. See, when you know and own the fact that you're introverted, and by the way, I am, it gives you the ability to really think through some questions and how you may be able to gauge people in advance. So if you really kind of take the time to think about who you're going to be potentially engaging with, and maybe what sort of conversations you'd like to have with them and have a game plan going into it, then you can actually have more productive and meaningful conversations. I think a lot of people that are naturally extroverted don't necessarily have to do that. And they oftentimes can show up and wing it, and that's great, good for them. But I think that us introverts do have that advantage of really sometimes having to think through how we're going to interact with people and what those topics are that we're going to bring up and we're going to engage with folks. The other thing that we get to do as introverts is really think wisely about the people that we do want to engage with. Because for us, it's not about quantity, it's more about quality. And that's a great thing about a conference, is that you do know who's going there. And in doing so, you can cull through that list and you can figure out who it makes the most sense to meet with. It really gives you the ability to choose your conversation partners wisely. And in doing so, you have a lot more meaningful interactions. And the other thing that does is when you're interacting with people that you want to interact with and that you have some known commonality with, it's actually going to be a lot less stressful. So not to state the obvious, but in that type of context, it's really important to focus on the relationship and not just handing business cards. I think as an introvert, it helps you be a little bit more attuned to when it's time to maybe move on, maybe when a conversation's not really that valuable or you don't really have anything in common. So introverts oftentimes have to work a little bit harder to be communicative, and honestly, that can be a bit of a gift sometimes. So the benefit of being introverted is that you oftentimes need to think through the conversations to begin with, like who you want to talk to and what you want to talk to them about. And you can oftentimes come across as being more intentional and more authentic. I know that sounds a little bit counterintuitive because on one hand, you're planning out the conversation, but on another hand, it's actually to some degree more honest. You actually have a subject matter that is worthy of engagement. There's a reason to talk about this particular topic. So being an introvert can be a bit of a superpower because oftentimes introverts are really good at reading people. And I think that's one of the things that often gets lost in a conference. It's all about who's more visible and who's interacting the most. And yeah, sure, that's true to some degree, but there's also a tremendous amount of value in sort of reading the room and paying attention to the physical cues that other people that are displaying in your surroundings, because you can learn a lot by that. Just remember, it's not a contest of who talks the most. As a matter of fact, sometimes people that really force it and try and talk when they're not really ready to or don't really have anything meaningful to share, it actually comes across as weakness or insecurity. It's really important for introverts, again, myself included, to have rest, to have intentional periods of rest. Because as an introvert, communicating sucks a lot of our energy. And so it's really important to carve out times where you can even go back to your hotel room and just have 10 minutes of quiet time. And that may seem kind of inconsequential, but it really goes a long way. And it's also just going to help you keep your sanity.
The key is you have to make a strong impression. So you want to have a picture taken. You want to say some peculiar non sequitur that people remember. You want to note something unique, a talking point for later.
Back to the topic at hand. What's the mindset that's most useful we can use when going into a conference? That's a question I really want to play with today. And I would encourage you to ask yourself maybe a couple questions. Is one would be, what would make this conference really worthwhile? And again, these are things you need to think about weeks in advance. When you do that, it really kind of gives you an opportunity to think through who you're going to meet, what sessions you're going to go to, how you're going to present yourself. But really giving that some thought can be incredibly valuable. The other question I would challenge you to ask yourself is, how do you measure ROI for this particular event? And that's definitely an art and not a science. A lot of these relationships that you'll make at these conferences take a lot of time to develop, and it's not necessarily easy to say, oh, I went to a conference and I made a sale or something like that. And honestly, that's a really sort of defeating way to think about it as well. You're really going to come across as disingenuous if that's your mindset going into the conference. So I would encourage you to think about going to a conference as a means of making new relationships and building on existing ones, because that's really where the power of a conference comes into place. You're in a context where you have the ability to engage with somebody face to face that you normally wouldn't have the opportunity to engage with. Okay, so this is a really important one. I would encourage you to think about, of the people that you want to meet with there, think about how you can add value to them, not just what you can get for yourself, because really that is how you build relationships. Maybe there's introductions that you can make. All right, here's the other thing to think about. If you're an employee and maybe your employer enforced you to go to this conference and you're really struggling with finding the value of it, here's a great question you could ask yourself is, how could I use this conference to advance my career? What skills could I learn? What connections could I make? Who could I ask for advice while I'm here that could help me advance in my career? All right, so here's another couple things I would challenge you to consider just in terms of the mindset to which you go into a conference. Number one is, what would I act like if I were highly confident in this situation? Now, let me define the word confidence really quick, because confidence is not arrogance. Confidence is all about being comfortable in your own skin. It's the opposite of the imposter syndrome. It's having the sense that you belong in this particular place and you're perfectly comfortable interacting with anybody here at any given point. So if you were that person, and I'm not even asking you to accept right now that you are, but just try this on, almost like a piece of clothing. Ask yourself, what would it look like if I were that person? And then give yourself the freedom to sort of try that on and see maybe what that would feel like and look like. Like, how would that person talk? How would that person walk? How would that person interact with other people? When you can adopt that type of mindset, then you'll find people are sort of naturally attracted to you because you're just comfortable. You're not trying to sell them anything. You don't necessarily need their approval. It's a much more organic way of interacting with people. And it's the perfect way to build relationships. Here's the other thing. You obviously have to have a plan. So this can be things like sessions you want to attend, people you want to meet. Be thinking about, of people you want to meet, what you want to say to them. What do you want that interaction to be like? What would be valuable for them? What would be valuable for you? And can you have that sort of exchange in your communication with them? So look at the attendee list and really give some thought to it. You may even want to research some of the people there and research their companies and have something topical that you're ready to talk about. Maybe there's a particular strategy that you recently read about that they employed in their business, and you may want to ask them how that went. I think that most people are pretty open to talking about that. I mean, let's be honest, people like talking about themselves. Okay, so one of the advantages of going to conferences is this whole concept of you becoming omnipresent as a brand and as a fixture in your industry. Okay, so here's a couple opportunities for growth in the realm of a conference. And these can be a little bit uncomfortable, but they'll help you tremendously. So number one is set a meeting with somebody who's normally maybe kind of out of your range. And as you do that, just make sure that you have something of value to give to them, because that's a powerful connection to make, regardless of whether or not you ever do business with this person or work for them. Just make sure, as I mentioned earlier, that you have something of value to give. Okay, another one could be seek out an opportunity to speak on a panel or moderate a panel.
It's a 45-day, 45-point, 1 point per day. We get to 45 points. We're back in business.
I've done this a number of times. And again, that just sort of reinforces this whole idea of being omnipresent, just always being associated with this industry. It's sort of like people will just recognize you. And in doing so, more opportunities to just land in your lap. And then the other one is to post on social media about your involvement at these conferences. I'm literally in the process of doing this now, where I just left a conference last week, had some really important things that I learned there. It was a real estate tech conference. In doing so, I was able to go back and on LinkedIn, post about certain things that I learned, certain trends in the industry and certain technologies that I think are going to be really impactful in the near future. Okay, and I know I said this before, but the most important thing of a conference is to focus on building relationships. Whatever you do, resist selling at all costs.
B, C. A, always be B, C, closing. Always be closing.
Develop a mindset of very sincere curiosity, and this will help you really build relationships. And as you meet people, and again, this goes back to my comment about doing some research beforehand, because when you know a little bit about someone's background, there's probably something there that you're curious about, that you want to know more about. Use this as an opportunity to dig a little deeper and learn something. And in doing so, you'll make deeper connections with people. I love this term that's often used in the creator world that we don't really see a lot in the broader business world, but we use the term collaboration a lot. And I think that's just so powerful. It's such a great way to think about a business arrangement, because it's not about just selling somebody something, because that almost implies a winner and a loser. Collaboration has a lot more of a win-win type of connotation to it. It's two people or multiple people coming together with a common goal in mind. That's a much more powerful way to think about this as opposed to selling something. I know I'm belaboring the point here, but be authentic, be yourself, be genuinely curious. I've been to so many of these things. I can tell you that not only will you become more successful in terms of building relationships, but honestly, your quality of life is just so much better, because you're really truly meeting people and you're curious about them. You're going to enjoy the time so much more. These are all small things, but they add up over time. They can have a really lasting effect. So as always, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.